fall of 1976, the Holloway family moved into their dream home, a sprawling Victorian house on the edge of a small town. It was perfect until they realized the house wasn't just a house, it was alive, and it was hungry. The Holloway family, Mark, Linda, their teenage daughter Emily, and their young son Tommy, had been searching for the perfect home for months. When they found the Victorian house, it seemed too good to be true. The real estate agent mentioned it had been vacant for years, but the price was unbeatable. The first night in the house was peaceful. The family unpacked their belongings, laughing and joking as they settled into their new home. But as the sun set and the house grew dark, Tommy began to act strangely. He claimed he heard someone singing in the walls, a soft, melodic tune that no one else could hear. "Mom, do you hear it? It's so pretty." Linda smiled nervously, brushing his hair back. "It's just the wind, sweetheart." But Emily noticed something odd too. The air in the house felt warm, almost alive, as if the walls were breathing. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. At night, the family would hear faint breathing sounds, like the house itself was alive. They searched every room, but found nothing. Linda would set the table for dinner, only to find the plates and silverware rearranged when she returned. Emily woke up one morning to find deep claw marks on her bedroom wall, but by the time she called her parents, the marks had vanished. The family tried to brush it off, blaming the old house's creaks and groans, but Tommy's behavior grew more concerning. He began sleepwalking, always ending up in the basement. One night, Mark followed him downstairs and found Tommy standing in the corner, whispering, "The house is hungry." "Tommy, what are you talking about?" Tommy turned to him, his eyes glassy and distant. "It wants us, Dad. It's always been hungry." Linda, determined to uncover the truth, began researching the house's history. She discovered that it had been built by a reclusive architect who vanished without a trace. The architect's notes mentioned a living house, a structure designed to sustain itself by feeding on the energy of its inhabitants. Meanwhile, the breathing grew louder, and the family started seeing shadows moving in the corners of their vision. Emily began having nightmares of being trapped in the walls, her voice joining the faint singing Tommy had heard. One night, Mark ventured into the basement to investigate. He found a hidden room behind a false wall, filled with strange symbols and a journal. The last entry read, "It's too late. The house has chosen us." The next morning, Linda was gone. Her research materials were scattered across the table, but there was no sign of her. Emily and Mark searched the house frantically, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. That night, Emily was pulled into the wall by shadowy hands, her screams echoing through the house before being silenced. Mark, desperate to save his family, went into the basement one last time. He never returned. The final scene shows Tommy sitting alone in the house, humming the same tune he heard in the walls. The camera pans out to show the house's windows glowing faintly, as if alive. The house still stands, silent and empty, but some say they can still hear breathing from within. What happened to the Holloway family, and what does the house want? Comment below with your theories. In 1989, a hiker named Sarah stumbled upon a forgotten village deep in the woods. The houses were intact, the tables set for meals, but there was no sign of the people who once lived there. What she discovered would haunt her forever. Sarah had been hiking for days, exploring remote areas of the forest. When she stumbled upon the village, it was like stepping into a time capsule. The houses were perfectly preserved, with furniture, clothing, and even food on the tables, but there was no sign of the villagers, no bodies, no graves, nothing. In one of the houses, Sarah found a journal. The last entry read, "They're coming tonight." The date was over 50 years ago. Despite her growing unease, Sarah decided to spend the night in one of the houses. As night fell, the village came alive with strange sounds. Sarah heard footsteps outside, but when she looked, no one was there. She saw figures moving between the houses, their forms indistinct and flickering like shadows. The journal's pages began to fill with new writing, as if someone was updating it in real time. The entries grew increasingly frantic. They're here, they're watching. Sarah tried to leave, but the forest outside the village seemed to stretch endlessly. Every path led her back to the village. In the basement of one house, Sarah found a hidden room. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and a pile of bones lay in the corner. The journal mentioned a ritual the villagers had performed to protect themselves from the watchers in the woods. Sarah tried to perform the ritual herself, but as she chanted the words, the shadowy figures surrounded the house. They began chanting in an unknown language, their voices growing louder and more menacing. The shadowy figures broke into the house and dragged Sarah into the cellar. The final scene shows the village the next morning. The houses are empty, the tables set for meals, and Sarah's backpack sits in the center of the village. The journal's last entry now reads, "She's one of them now." The village still stands, hidden deep in the woods. Some say the watchers are still there, waiting for the next traveler to stumble upon their domain. What happened to Sarah, and who or what are the watchers? Comment below with your theories. Evelyn Carter, a journalist, drives through a dense forest to reach Black Hollow. The road is narrow, and the trees seem to close in around her. Her car radio crackles with static, and a faint whisper slips through. "Turn back." Evelyn shakes it off, gripping the steering wheel tighter. She's here to find her sister Leela, who vanished a year ago. Leela had come to Black Hollow to write a book about the town's history, but disappeared without a trace. Black Hollow is a ghost town. The streets are empty, and the few locals Evelyn encounters avoid her gaze. She checks into a rundown motel where the owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Greer, warns her, "You shouldn't be here. The Hollow doesn't take kindly to outsiders." Evelyn brushes off the warning and heads to Leela's rental house. The house is frozen in time. Leela's clothes are still in the closet, her laptop on the desk, and a half-drunk cup of coffee on the table. Evelyn finds Leela's journal hidden under the floorboards. The entries start off cheerful, but grow increasingly frantic. The last entry reads, "They're watching me. The veil is thinning. I can hear them whispering at night, calling my name. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. If you're reading this, Evelyn, please don't come looking for me." Evelyn's hands tremble as she reads the words. She hears a faint whisper behind her. "Evelyn." She spins around, but the room is empty. That night, Evelyn hears Leela's voice calling her from the woods. She grabs a flashlight and follows the sound, her heart pounding. The trees seem to close in around her, and the air grows colder. Suddenly, the flashlight flickers and dies. In the darkness, Evelyn sees a shadowy figure standing among the trees. Its eyes glow faintly, and its mouth stretches into a grotesque smile. Evelyn runs back to the house, slamming the door behind her. She locks every window and door, but the whispers continue. "You shouldn't have come." Evelyn meets Thomas, a reclusive historian who lives on the outskirts of town. He's hesitant to talk at first, but eventually reveals the legend of the veil, a barrier between the living and the dead that is thinning. "The veil keeps the dead where they belong," Thomas explains, "but every 50 years it weakens, and the town must perform a ritual to strengthen it. If they fail, the dead will walk among us." Evelyn feels a chill run down her spine. What happens if the ritual fails? Thomas hesitates. The watchers come. They take what they're owed. Evelyn begins to hear Leela's voice more frequently. It's faint at first, but soon she can make out words. "Evelyn, help me. I'm still here." She finds Leela's belongings scattered around town, a scarf on a park bench, a notebook in the library, a bracelet in the church. Each item feels like a message, but Evelyn can't decipher what it means. In the town's archives, Evelyn finds a photograph of Leela. It's dated 50 years ago. The woman in the photo looks exactly like Leela, but the clothes and setting are from another era. Evelyn's hands shake as she stares at the photo. This isn't possible. Thomas looks at her with pity. The veil doesn't just weaken, it repeats. The same souls, the same sacrifices, over and over. That night, Evelyn has a vivid dream. She's in a dark forest, and Leela is running toward her, screaming. Behind Leela, shadowy figures. The watchers are closing in. Evelyn, help me, Leela cries. Evelyn tries to reach her, but the ground beneath her feet turns to mud, pulling her down. She wakes up gasping, her sheets soaked with sweat. Thomas explains that the watchers are entities that appear when the veil weakens. They're drawn to those who are marked for sacrifice. Your sister, she was marked, Thomas says. That's why they took her. Evelyn feels a surge of anger and guilt. Why didn't anyone stop them? Why didn't you stop them? Thomas looks away. No one can stop them. Once you're marked, there's no escape. Evelyn finds strange symbols carved into the walls of her rental house. They match the ones in Leela's journal. Thomas identifies them as part of the ritual to strengthen the veil, but they've been altered, twisted into something darker. Someone's trying to break the veil, Thomas says, and they're using your sister to do it. Evelyn sees a watcher in her room one night. It's tall and skeletal, with glowing eyes and a mouth that stretches too wide. It whispers, "You're next." Evelyn screams and turns on the light, but the watcher is gone. The only evidence it was ever there is a faint, cold breeze and the smell of decay. Evelyn finds a hidden message from Leela in the church. The keeper is lying. The veil can be broken. Find the key. Evelyn doesn't know what the key is, but she's determined to find it. She won't let Leela's sacrifice be in vain. Evelyn discovers a hidden room in the town's church, filled with old ritual tools, candles, daggers, and jars of black liquid. The walls are covered in symbols, some of which match the ones in Lila's journal. In the center of the room is an altar, stained with what looks like dried blood. Evelyn feels a wave of nausea as she realizes what this place was used for. Evelyn finds a journal belonging to the town's founder, Elias Black. It details the first ritual performed 200 years ago to strengthen the veil. The ritual required a sacrifice, a young woman chosen by the keeper. The last entry reads, "The veil is a lie. It does not protect us. It feeds on us. The keeper is not our savior. He is our jailer." Evelyn's heart races as she realizes the truth. The veil isn't a barrier, it's a prison, and Lila is trapped inside. That night, Evelyn has another vision. She's in the hidden room, but it's filled with people in old-fashioned clothes. They're chanting as a young woman is led to the altar. Evelyn recognizes the woman. It's Lila. No, Evelyn screams, but no one hears her. She watches in horror as the keeper, a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes, approaches Lila with a dagger. Evelyn wakes up gasping, her hands clutching the sheets. Evelyn confronts Thomas about the vision. He admits that the ritual has been performed every 50 years, and each time, a young woman is sacrificed. Your sister was chosen, Thomas says, but she fought back. She tried to break the veil. Evelyn feels a surge of pride and grief. I have to finish what she started. Thomas warns her. If you break the veil, you'll unleash something far worse than the Watchers. Evelyn spends hours in the town's archives, piecing together the history of the sacrifices. She finds records of every young woman who was taken, their names, their ages, their faces. One name stands out, Eleanor Black, the first sacrifice. She was Elias Black's daughter. Evelyn realizes that the sacrifices aren't random, they're chosen by blood. Lila was chosen because she was researching the town's history, just like Eleanor. Evelyn finds a clue in Lila's journal. The key is in the mirror. She remembers the strange symbols carved into the walls of her rental house and realizes they're a map. She follows the map to an old abandoned house on the edge of town. Inside, she finds a mirror covered in a black cloth. When she removes the cloth, she sees Lila's reflection staring back at her. "Evelyn, you have to break the mirror," Lila says. "It's the only way to free us." As Evelyn prepares to break the mirror, the Watchers appear. They're faster and more aggressive than before, their glowing eyes filled with rage. Evelyn grabs a piece of broken furniture and smashes the mirror. The glass shatters, and a blinding light fills the room. When the light fades, the Watchers are gone. Evelyn hears a deep, echoing voice. "You've made a grave mistake." She turns to see the keeper standing in the doorway. His eyes burn with anger, and his voice is like ice. "The veil is all that holds back the darkness. If it falls, you will regret it." Evelyn stands her ground. "I'm not afraid of you." The keeper smiles, a cold, cruel smile. "You will be." Evelyn finds a hidden passage beneath the church. It leads to a dark, underground chamber filled with bones and strange symbols. In the center of the chamber is a massive stone door, covered in carvings of the Watchers and the keeper. The door is slightly ajar, and a cold, dark energy emanates from it. Evelyn finds a journal written by Eleanor Black. It reveals the truth about the veil. It's not a barrier, it's a seal. The keeper is not a protector. He's a warden, keeping something far worse trapped on the other side. "The veil must not be broken," Eleanor writes. "If it falls, the darkness will consume us all." Evelyn feels a surge of doubt. Did she make a mistake by breaking the mirror? Evelyn has another vision. She's in the chamber, but it's filled with people in old-fashioned clothes. They're chanting as the keeper opens the stone door. Evelyn sees what's on the other side, a swirling black void filled with screams and whispers. The keeper steps through the door, and the void begins to spill into the chamber. Evelyn wakes up screaming. Evelyn realizes she has a choice. She can try to repair the veil, trapping Lila and the other sacrifices forever, or she can break it completely, risking the darkness escaping. She hears Lila's voice. "Evelyn, you have to let me go. It's the only way." Evelyn breaks down in tears. "I can't lose you again." "You won't," Lila says. "I'll always be with you." Evelyn follows the cold, dark energy emanating from the stone door in the underground chamber. She steps through the door and finds herself in a vast, cavernous space. The walls are lined with cages, each containing a shadowy figure, souls trapped by the keeper. At the center of the lair stands the keeper, his form shifting and twisting like smoke. His voice echoes through the chamber. "You should not have come here, Evelyn. The veil is not yours to break." Evelyn stands her ground, clutching Lila's journal. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm here to free my sister." The keeper laughs, a sound that sends chills down Evelyn's spine. "Your sister is gone. She is part of the veil now." The keeper offers Evelyn a deal. He will release Lila's soul if Evelyn takes her place. "The veil must be fed," he says. "It is the only way to maintain balance." Evelyn hesitates, her heart torn between saving Lila and the fear of what lies beyond the veil. "Don't do it, Evelyn," Lila's voice whispers in her ear. "He's lying. The veil is a prison, not a barrier." Evelyn refuses the keeper's offer and tries to escape the lair. The keeper sends the Watchers after her, their glowing eyes filled with rage. Evelyn runs through the cavern, dodging shadowy hands and leaping over chasms. She finds a hidden passage and slips through just as the Watchers close in. Back in the underground chamber, Evelyn finds a hidden compartment in the wall. Inside is a mirror shard, the key to breaking the veil. Lila's voice speaks through the shard. "You have to break it, Evelyn. It's the only way to free us." Evelyn hesitates, her hands trembling. "What happens if I do?" "The darkness will come," Lila says, "but we'll be free." Evelyn gathers the ritual tools from the hidden room in the church. She carves the symbols from Lila's journal into the stone door and places the mirror shard at the center. As she begins the ritual, the air grows colder, and the ground beneath her feet begins to shake. The Watchers appear, their forms flickering like shadows. The Watchers attack, their claws slashing at Evelyn. As she chants the words from the journal, she fights back with the dagger, but there are too many of them. Just as the watchers close in, a blinding light fills the chamber. The watchers scream and vanish, leaving Evelyn alone with the stone door. Evelyn smashes the mirror shard against the stone door. The door cracks, and a blinding light pours through the cracks. The ground shakes violently, and Evelyn is thrown to the floor. The door shatters, and the light fades, leaving the chamber in darkness. Evelyn wakes up in the chamber, the stone door gone. The air is thick with the smell of decay, and the walls are covered in black, pulsating veins. She hears Lila's voice. "Evelyn, you did it. We're free." But as Evelyn looks around, she realizes the cost of breaking the veil. The darkness is spreading, and the town is in danger. Evelyn returns to the town to find it in chaos. The streets are filled with shadowy figures, and the air is thick with the smell of decay. The townspeople are terrified, their faces pale, and their eyes wide with fear. "What have you done?" Mrs. Gree screams. "You've doomed us all." The keeper appears in the town square, his form towering over the buildings. "You thought you could break the veil and escape the consequences," he says. "You were wrong." Evelyn stands her ground, clutching the dagger. "I'm not afraid of you." The keeper laughs. "You should be." Evelyn fights the keeper, using the ritual tools to weaken him. The battle is fierce, with the keeper's shadowy form shifting and twisting to avoid her attacks. Just as the keeper is about to strike the final blow, Lila appears, her form glowing with light. She attacks the keeper, giving Evelyn the chance to deliver the final blow. The keeper is defeated, but the darkness continues to spread. Lila tells Evelyn that the only way to stop it is to seal the veil again, but it will require a sacrifice. "I'll do it," Evelyn says. "I'll take your place." Lila shakes her head. "No, Evelyn, it has to be me." Evelyn breaks down in tears as Lila steps into the light, her form dissolving into the air. The darkness recedes, and the town is saved. The town is quiet, the streets empty. The townspeople are gone, and the buildings are crumbling. Evelyn walks through the town, her heart heavy with grief. She finds Lila's journal in the church, the last entry written in her own hand. The veil is sealed, but the cost was too high. Evelyn looks into a broken mirror and sees Lila's reflection staring back at her. "I'm still here, Evelyn," Lila says. "I'll always be with you." Evelyn smiles through her tears. "I'll never forget you." Evelyn leaves Black Hollow, the town fading into the distance. As she drives away, she hears Lila's voice one last time. "Thank you, Evelyn, for setting me free." The screen fades to black and the words appear. "Some mysteries are better left unsolved." Maya Carter, a freelance photographer, arrives in Ashwick to document the town's eerie beauty. The town is known for its strange history. Every year, on the same night, the town's clocks stop at 3:17 a.m., and the residents vanish for exactly 1 hour. Maya is skeptical, but intrigued. She checks into a quaint bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple, the Hargroves, who warn her, "Don't go out after dark. The forgotten hour is not for the living." Maya explores Ashwick during the day, capturing its decaying charm. The town is picturesque but unsettling. Its streets are too quiet, and the residents seem to move in slow motion. She meets Elliot, a local historian, who tells her about the town's curse. Every year, on the night of the autumn equinox, time stops, the clocks freeze, and the town is plunged into darkness. When the hour passes, the residents return, but they're never the same. That night, Maya hears whispers outside her window. She looks out and sees shadowy figures moving through the streets. The clock on her bedside table stops at 3:17 a.m., and the world goes silent. Maya grabs her camera and ventures outside. The streets are empty, but she feels like she's being watched. She snaps a photo of the town square, and when she reviews it, she sees a figure standing in the shadows, a figure that wasn't there when she took the picture. Maya wanders the empty streets, her flashlight cutting through the thick fog. The air is cold, and the silence is deafening. She hears footsteps behind her, but sees no one. She finds a pocket watch on the ground, its hands frozen at 3:17 a.m. When she picks it up, she hears a voice. "You shouldn't be here." Maya begins to see shadowy figures moving in the corners of her vision. They don't approach her, but seem to be guiding her somewhere. She follows them to an old clock tower at the edge of town. The door is ajar, and inside, she finds a room filled with broken clocks, all stopped at 3:17 a.m. Maya has a vision of the town's past. She sees the residents gathered in the square, their faces pale and their eyes wide with fear. A figure in a black cloak, the keeper of time, appears and raises a staff. The clocks stop and the residents vanish. Maya wakes up in her bed, the clock ticking normally again. She checks her camera. The photo of the town square is gone. Maya visits Elliot again, who tells her about the keeper of time. He's not human. He's a force of nature, bound to the town by an ancient curse. Every year, he takes an hour from the town's time and a piece of its soul. Maya asks why no one has tried to stop him. Elliot shakes his head. Many have tried. None have succeeded. Maya finds a journal in the clock tower written by a woman named Eleanor Ashwick, the town's founder. The last entry reads, "The keeper cannot be defeated. He is time itself, but there is a way to break the curse, if you're willing to pay the price." That night, Maya sees the Watchers, shadowy figures that serve the keeper. They surround her house, their glowing eyes fixed on her. Maya locks the doors and windows, but the whispers grow louder. "You're running out of time." Maya finds a hidden room beneath the clock tower, filled with ritual tools and ancient symbols. The walls are covered in carvings of the keeper and the Watchers. In the center of the room is an hourglass, its sand frozen in place. Maya has another vision. She sees Eleanor Ashwick performing a ritual to bind the keeper to the town. The ritual requires a sacrifice, a piece of the sacrificer's soul. Eleanor's voice echoes in Maya's mind. "The curse can be broken, but the price is steep. Are you willing to pay it?" Maya realizes that breaking the curse will require her to sacrifice a part of herself. She hesitates, torn between saving the town and protecting her own soul. Maya gathers the ritual tools and returns to the clock tower. The Watchers surround the tower, their eyes glowing with malice. Maya begins the ritual, chanting the words from Eleanor's journal. The air grows colder, and the ground begins to shake. The keeper appears, his form towering over Maya. "You cannot break the curse," he says. "Time is eternal, and so am I." Maya stands her ground. "I'm not afraid of you." The keeper smiles, a cold, cruel smile. "You will be." Maya completes the ritual, sacrificing a piece of her soul. The hourglass shatters, and the clocks in the tower begin to move again. The keeper screams as his form begins to dissolve. "You've made a grave mistake," he says. "The curse is broken, but the darkness remains. The town is quiet, the streets empty, the residents are gone, and the buildings are crumbling." Maya walks through the town, her heart heavy with grief. She finds Eleanor's journal in the clock tower, the last entry written in her own hand. The curse is broken, but the cost was too high. Maya looks into a broken mirror and sees Eleanor's reflection staring back at her. "I'm still here, Maya," Eleanor says. "I'll always be with you." Maya smiles through her tears. "I'll never forget you." Maya leaves Ashwick, the town fading into the distance. As she drives away, she hears Eleanor's voice one last time. "Thank you, Maya, for setting me free." The town of Hollow Pines sat nestled between dense forest and jagged mountains, population 4,326. On November 12, 2019, local forest ranger Marcus Helms reported unusual activity while conducting routine patrols. A series of geometric patterns carved into trees, forming a perfect circle approximately 1 mile in diameter. "I've worked these woods for 23 years, Helms told investigators. never seen anything like it. Each carving was identical, this strange symbol that looked almost like an incomplete eye. The precision was what got me, like someone used the exact same tool, the exact same pressure on each tree. 3 days after Helm's discovery, 19-year-old college student Emma Larsian disappeared while hiking along Trail 27, which intersected the circle of marked trees. Her vehicle was found at the trailhead parking lot, but despite an extensive search involving over 200 volunteers, no trace of Emma was found until the recordings. On December 1st, exactly 2 weeks after Emma's disappearance, her smartphone was discovered on the forest floor. The device was undamaged, battery still at 42%, and contained 3 audio recordings made after her reported disappearance. The final recording, time-stamped at 3:17 a.m. on November 27th, captured Emma's voice. "It's been watching for days. I can't see it, but I can feel it watching. The trees here don't move in the wind like they should. I've been walking for so long, but I keep ending up in the same clearing. There's something wrong with the sky here. It's static interference. They were right about the doorways. They've always been here. We just weren't supposed to see them. I found markings in the dirt beneath the fallen leaves. The same symbols from the fording. Oh God, it's opening." The recording ends abruptly. Detective Sofia Torres led the investigation, initially focusing on potential foul play. However, forensic analysis of the carving patterns suggested they had been created over a period of months, not days, with the most recent cuts dating back approximately 6 weeks before Emma's disappearance. The timeline doesn't add up, Torres noted in her official report. Dozens of hikers used that trail every week. How did no one notice these markings until Helms reported them? Torres interviewed Hollow Pines historian, 82-year-old Walter Jenkins, who revealed unsettling information about the area's past. "There's a reason the early settlers named it Hollow Pines," Jenkins explained, showing Torres century-old town records. Every 40 into 50 years, there's a cluster of disappearances in those woods. 1872, 1924, 1976, people vanish, then strange stories start spreading. Folks seeing things that shouldn't be there. Then it stops, and everyone forgets until the next cycle. When Torres asked what Jenkins thought happened to those people, he simply replied, "Some places have thin boundaries. Not everyone who wanders returns." In January 2020, 2 more hikers disappeared within the marked circle. Brothers Ryan and Michael Cahill. Their equipment was found scattered along the trail, including a damaged camera containing numerous photographs. Most were ordinary hiking shots, except for the final 3 images. A blurred photograph of what appears to be a tall, emaciated figure standing between distant trees, estimated to be approximately 7-8 feet tall. A clear shot of a circular arrangement of stones, with the same symbol found on the trees scratched into the central stone, a completely black frame, with a single line of text overlaid reading, "The door is open." Digital forensics could not determine how the text was added to the image, as the metadata showed no signs of editing software. By February 2020, local authorities established a restricted zone around the forest area. News of the disappearances had attracted attention from several paranormal investigation teams and urban explorers, despite police warnings. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, a geologist from State University, requested permission to conduct ground-penetrating radar studies of the area, citing unusual seismic readings. There appears to be some kind of cavity or chamber system beneath the forest floor, Montgomery reported, approximately 60 feet below surface level, forming roughly the same circular pattern as the marked trees above. It doesn't match any known natural formation process. When her team began excavation at the site, they discovered something remarkable: a perfectly preserved wooden door frame, carbon dated to approximately 400 years old. embedded in solid bedrock. The frame contained no door, just empty space, and was carved with symbols matching those found on the trees. What troubled investigators most was that the soil surrounding the frame showed no signs of disturbance, as if the frame had somehow been placed there without digging. The night after this discovery, 3 members of Montgomery's research team failed to return to base camp. Their equipment was found at the excavation site, including a voice recorder that had been running for several hours. Most of the recording contained only ambient forest sounds until the final 7 minutes. "Did you hear that? There's nothing there, Tom." "Weber, I saw something move between the trees, like something watching us." "Guys, the equipment's going haywire. These readings don't make sense." Sound of electronic beeping intensifies. "Keller, what's happening to the sky?" "Weber, it's just getting dark. D. Clouds moving in." "Keller, no, look up. That's not clouds. That's not. The frame is it glowing? Don't get too close." "Weber, James. Keller, he just walked through it. The frame, Keller, they're coming through now. Oh God, they're coming through. They've been waiting so long." The symbols weren't warnings, they were an invitation. "Run, D, run." Following the disappearance of the researchers, authorities ordered a complete evacuation of the area. Military personnel established a perimeter around the forest while a specialized containment team investigated the excavation site. They discovered the wooden frame had been destroyed, apparently burned, with ash scattered in a perfect circle around where it had stood. Among the ashes was a single photograph, seemingly decades old yet in pristine condition. It showed a group of 5 people standing in the same clearing, dated 1976, the previous cycle of disappearances Jenkins had mentioned. Most disturbing was that one of the individuals in the photograph was identified as Emma Larzian, the first person to disappear in 2019, despite the photo being taken nearly 25 years before she was born. Forensic analysis confirmed the photograph had not been altered or tampered with. In March 2020, geologists reported that the underground cavity detected beneath the forest had disappeared completely, with solid bedrock now showing on scanning equipment where the chamber had been. The final piece of evidence came from a thermal imaging drone that captured footage of the forest clearing at night. For approximately 7 seconds, the footage showed what appeared to be human-shaped heat signatures moving within the forest, over 30 of them, despite no physical presence being visible on regular cameras. Among the heat signatures was a much larger figure, estimated at nearly 8 feet tall. As the drone approached for a closer view, all equipment failed simultaneously. When recovered, the drone's memory contained only a single corrupted file with a partial text string. "We have always been here. The door opens every." The rest of the file was unrecoverable. To this day, none of the 7 missing persons have been found. The forest area remains restricted, with military personnel still guarding its perimeter. Local residents report occasional strange lights above the tree line on particularly dark nights, and some claim to hear distant voices calling familiar names from within the woods. The symbols found on the trees have begun to appear in other forests across 3 neighboring states. What opened in Hollow Pines? Where did the missing people go? And most importantly, when will the door open again? What do you think happened to the missing people of Hollow Pines? What is the significance of the 40 and 50-year cycle? Share your theories in the comments below. Catherine Wells received the news of her great-aunt Eleanor's death with little emotion. They had never been close. In fact, Catherine had only met the reclusive elderly woman twice in her 34 years. The lawyer's call informing her that she had inherited Blackwater Estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion situated on 40 acres of wooded land in rural Massachusetts, came as a complete surprise. "There must be some mistake," Catherine told the lawyer, Martin Groves. "Aunt Eleanor and I barely knew each other." "No mistake, Miss Wells. Groves replied with a curious hesitation in his voice. The will is quite specific. You are the sole heir, with one condition: you must reside in the estate for a minimum of 1 year before you can sell the property or access the full inheritance. That's an unusual stipulation, Catherine said. Groves cleared his throat. Your great-aunt was an unusual woman. There's something else you should know. The locals have certain stories about Blackwater. Nothing substantiated, of course. When Catherine pressed him for details, Groves was evasive, mentioning only that the property had a complicated history. What he didn't tell her, what Catherine would later discover in newspaper archives, was that between 1887 and 1967, 17 children had disappeared within a 5-mile radius of Blackwater Estate. None were ever found. Catherine arrived at Blackwater on October 14, 2021, the property shrouded in autumn fog, as she drove up the winding gravel driveway. The mansion loomed against the gray sky, its Victorian architecture an intimidating silhouette of spires and steep gables. The groundskeeper, Harold Thorne, a taciturn man in his 60s who came with the property, greeted her with little warmth. Miss Eleanor left instructions about your rooms, he said, avoiding direct eye contact. The east wing has been prepared. The west wing remains locked, as it has been for decades. Miss Eleanor was quite insistent about that in her final instructions. Why? Catherine asked. Thorne's weathered face remained impassive. Not my place to question. The keys to the west wing were buried with her. That first night, Catherine explored the east wing of the mansion, an overwhelming maze of antique furniture, aging wallpaper, and portrait-lined hallways. In the study, she found Eleanor's journals, dating back to the 1960s, meticulously catalogued and arranged on floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The earliest entry Catherine read, dated April 17, 1967, contained a single line. It has been exactly 20 years today. The silence beneath grows unbearable. Catherine quickly discovered that Blackwater was not a silent house. The aging structure creaked and groaned constantly, particularly at night. But by her third night in residence, she began to distinguish other sounds, faint and easily dismissed at first, like the distant echo of children's laughter, always seeming to come from behind the locked door that separated the east and west wings. Old houses make odd noises, Harold told her when she mentioned it. The mind fills in patterns, hears what it expects to hear, but Catherine hadn't expected to hear children, and she certainly hadn't expected to find small wet footprints in the hallway outside her bedroom on the 7th morning, footprints too small to be an adult's, that led directly to the wall and simply stopped. When she showed Harold, he stared at the footprints for a long moment before responding. Must have tracked them in yourself from the cellar. Water seeps in there when it rains. I haven't been in the cellar, Catherine replied. Harold's expression darkened. Then I suggest you continue to avoid it. Delving deeper into Eleanor's journals, Catherine found increasingly disturbing entries from the 1970s. November 3, 1972. I've sealed the passage in the cellar with concrete, but I can still hear them scratching behind it at night. The contractor thought I was mad. Perhaps I am. December 24, 1972. They know I can hear them. They've started calling my name. January 17, 1973. Found another doll buried in the garden today. That makes 7. Always the same strange markings carved into their faces. I burn them now. Catherine began experiencing vivid nightmares, dreams of children whispering in darkened hallways, of a vast network of tunnels beneath the house, of something ancient watching from the darkness. She would wake gasping for breath, the room ice cold regardless of the thermostat setting, the distinct impression of small hands having touched her face lingering on her skin. On her third week at Blackwater, Catherine found a previously overlooked box in Eleanor's study containing architectural plans of the mansion from its construction in 1879. The blueprints revealed something extraordinary. The original design included an extensive sub-basement that didn't appear in any modern records of the property. According to the plans, this sub-basement connected to a network of tunnels that extended well beyond the mansion's foundations. Most disturbing was a notation in faded handwriting at the corner of the blueprint, sealed by order of E. Blackwater, 1917, following the incident with the Merrick children. That same day, Catherine discovered something else, a hidden door in the library, concealed behind a bookcase. The small brass key she found taped to the back of Eleanor's portrait unlocked it, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Harold found her as she was about to descend. "You don't want to go down there, Miss Wells," he said quietly. "Some doors at Blackwater are locked for good reasons." "What are you not telling me, Harold? What happened in this house?" The groundskeeper's face remained impassive, but fear flickered in his eyes. "I've worked here 43 years. Your great-aunt hired me after I lost my younger sister. Emily was the last one to go missing in 1967. She was playing in these woods. I was supposed to be watching her." "You think Aunt Eleanor had something to do with the disappearances?" Catherine asked. "No," Harold replied. "I think she was trying to stop them, but some things can't be stopped once they've been started. Your great-grandfather, Edmund Blackwater, he was not a good man. The things he did in those tunnels, the door he opened." Later that night, Catherine heard it clearly for the first time. Not laughter, but crying. A child's sobs, echoing from somewhere deep within the walls. Following the sound, led her to the locked door of the west wing, where she pressed her ear against the aged wood. "Hello?" she called softly. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped instantly. Then a child's voice whispered from just the other side of the door. "Catherine, we've been waiting for you. Grandmother said you'd come back to us." Catherine recoiled from the door. "I'm not your grandmother." "Not grandmother," the voice corrected. "Catherine, you were the first to find the door, the first to show us the way back. In 1887, the local historical society provided Catherine with information she hadn't expected. Catherine Blackwater, her great-grandfather, Edmund's younger sister, and her namesake, had been the first child to disappear from the property in 1887 at age 9. According to yellowed newspaper clippings, young Catherine had been fascinated by the construction of the mansion's deepest foundations and had often spoken of friends she'd made in the tunnels. Edmund Blackwater had spent a fortune expanding those tunnels over the subsequent decades, claiming to be searching for natural caverns rumored to exist beneath the property. After his death in 1917, his widow had ordered parts of the sub-basement sealed following what the papers delicately referred to as the tragedy involving the Merrick siblings. That night, Catherine found herself sleepwalking for the first time in her life. She awoke standing before the hidden staircase in the library, the door ajar, cold air flowing upward from below. On the top step lay a child's doll, ancient and worn, its porcelain face etched with symbols identical to those described in Eleanor's journal. The decision to descend those stairs would change everything. Catherine took a flashlight and followed the narrow stone steps downward, emerging into the sealed sub-basement. Decades of dust covered everything, except for a clear set of small footprints that led across the floor to a massive concrete wall, Eleanor's sealed passage. The concrete had cracked over the decades, a jagged fissure running from floor to ceiling. From within that crack emanated a soft, pulsing green light. As Catherine approached, she heard whispers from behind the wall, dozens of children's voices speaking in unison. "She's here. Catherine has returned." The circle completes. The beam of her flashlight revealed something embedded in the concrete, a small handprint pressed into the surface before it had dried. Next to it, carved into the concrete, were the words, "Catherine opened it. Only Catherine can close it." A child's voice spoke directly behind her. "You have to see it to understand. You have to remember." Catherine turned to find a young girl, no more than 9, with clothing and features that matched the single photograph she had seen of her great-grandfather's sister, the first Catherine Blackwater. "What do I need to remember?" Catherine asked, her voice shaking. What you found beneath the old oak. The door wasn't meant to be opened. The spectral child pointed toward the crack in the concrete. They've been trapped between for so long, neither here nor there. They're so hungry now. The crack in the wall widened as Catherine watched, the green light intensifying. Through the opening, she glimpsed something impossible, not earth or stone, but an endless twilight landscape stretching into infinity, populated by countless small silhouettes moving slowly toward the breach. They're coming back through, the child, Catherine said, all of them. And the one that follows, the concrete wall shattered outward, fragments exploding across the sub-basement. Catherine was thrown backward, striking her head against the stone floor. As consciousness faded, she saw small figures emerging from the widening portal, children from different eras, their forms translucent and distorted, eyes reflecting the sickly green light. Behind them, filling the portal, something massive stirred, a presence rather than a form, ancient and patient. Catherine awoke in her bedroom, Harold sitting grimly by her bedside. Sunlight streamed through the windows. You went into the tunnels, he said. It wasn't a question. What's happening in this house, Harold? The truth. The groundskeeper's weathered face seemed to age further as he spoke. In 1887, the first Catherine Blackwater found something while playing near the old oak tree. Something that had been buried for centuries, a doorway of sorts. Edmund became obsessed with it, conducting rituals in the tunnels, calling things through that were never meant to cross over. The missing children, offerings, Harold said quietly. Edmund believed the entity beyond the door would grant him knowledge, power, immortality. After his death, the ritual stopped, but the door remained partially open. Every 20 years, it widens enough for them to take more children, and Eleanor, she dedicated her life to containing it, to finding a way to seal it permanently. She discovered the ritual could only be undone by someone sharing the blood and name of the one who started it. Me, Catherine whispered. Catherine Wells. Harold nodded gravely. Your great-aunt changed her will when she learned your parents had named you Catherine. You're the only one who can end this, but the ritual must be completed before midnight on the anniversary of the first opening. When is that? October 31st, 1887, Harold said. You have 3 days. Over those 3 days, Catherine scoured Eleanor's journals and research, finding the ritual components scattered throughout cryptic entries. Meanwhile, the disturbances in the house intensified, furniture moving on its own, walls bleeding a black ichor that evaporated when touched, the constant sound of children running through halls that stood empty. On the evening of October 31st, Catherine descended into the sub-basement again, carrying the items Eleanor's notes had specified: 7 white candles, a knife of cold iron, her own blood, and the original Catherine's doll, which she'd found walled up in the west wing. The portal had grown, now spanning the entire wall, a shimmering gateway through which Catherine could see a vast blasted landscape beneath an alien sky. The spectral children stood assembled before it, watching her with hollow eyes. Among them, Catherine recognized the girl who shared her name. It's bigger now, the first Catherine said, hungrier. You have to finish what Eleanor started. Catherine arranged the candles in the pattern Eleanor had documented, sliced her palm with the iron knife, and began to recite the words of binding and closure from her great-aunt's final journal entry. The air grew heavy, charging with electricity. The ghost children began to fade, their forms becoming transparent. It's working, Harold called from the stairway. Keep going. But as Catherine reached the ritual's culmination, the largest candle extinguished itself. The portal pulsed, and a deep vibration shook the foundations of the house. From within the doorway, something vast began to emerge, not a physical form, but a darkness that absorbed all light, a presence that bent reality around it. No, the child, Catherine cried. It's coming through. The entity extended what might have been appendages, writhing tendrils of void, toward Catherine. Harold rushed forward, placing himself between Catherine and the darkness. Finish it, he shouted, as the tendrils wrapped around him. The final words. Catherine spoke the ritual's closing phrases as Harold was lifted into the air. The ghost children began flowing back toward the portal, pulled by an unseen force. The first Catherine was the last to go, her form lingering. "It's not complete," she warned. "The seventh candle represents the seventh child of the seventh generation. Without it, the door will open again." As she spoke, Harold was pulled through the portal, his final scream cut abruptly short. The concrete fragments rose from the floor, swirling in a vortex, before slamming back into place, rebuilding the wall in seconds. The green light faded, leaving Catherine alone in the darkness. The authorities found no trace of Harold Thorne. Despite an extensive search of the property, Catherine reported him missing, but with no evidence of foul play. The investigation eventually stalled. She remained at Blackwater, continuing her research into the family's dark history. In Eleanor's most hidden journal, kept in a locked compartment beneath the floorboards of the West Wing, Catherine found the truth she had been dreading. The ritual had never been meant to close the portal permanently. It could only be reset, postponed for another cycle. Without the seventh child of the seventh generation, the entity would return, the door would reopen, and the cycle of disappearances would begin again. The final pages of Eleanor's journal contained a family tree, tracing the Blackwater lineage down through the generations. At the bottom, Catherine's name was circled, with a notation: "The last of our line. When she is gone, there will be no one left to perform the ritual." 6 months after inheriting Blackwater Estate, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The doctors confirmed it would be a girl. That night, Catherine felt a small hand touch her face as she drifted to sleep, and a child's voice, the first Catherine, whispered in her ear, "The seventh child of the seventh generation. She will be born on October 31st. The circle continues. Catherine tried to leave Blackwater 3 times in the subsequent months. Each attempt ended in failure. Roads that should have led away from the property somehow looped back to the main gate, her car engine dying inexplicably, taxi drivers becoming hopelessly lost. The house would not release her. As her pregnancy progressed, Catherine continued exploring the mansion's secrets. In the West Wing, she discovered a hidden room filled with photographs of children, all those who had disappeared, arranged in a complex pattern on the walls. At the center was an empty frame, waiting. On some nights, Catherine would wake to find herself standing in the sub-basement, her unconscious hands having traced strange symbols on the concrete wall. The barrier between worlds was thinning again. In her final journal entry, dated October 30th, Catherine wrote, "I understand now what Eleanor was trying to do, not just to contain it, but to end it entirely. The entity requires 7 generations of our bloodline to fully manifest in this world. Eleanor thought ending the Blackwater line would starve it, but I found another way. The original ritual wasn't meant to open a door. It was a binding, a trap. Edmund corrupted it, reversed it. I believe I can turn it back, but the price is unimaginable. If anyone finds this journal, know that whatever happens tomorrow night, I made my choice willingly. Some doors, once opened, require more than words to close." Catherine Wells disappeared from Blackwater Estate on October 31st, 2022. The concrete wall in the sub-basement was found shattered, the tunnels beyond empty. In the nursery, prepared for her unborn child, investigators found only an antique doll with strange symbols carved into its porcelain face. The house stands empty now, but locals report seeing lights in the windows at night and the distant sound of children playing on the grounds. Every Halloween, flowers appear on the grave of Eleanor Blackwater, left by a woman matching Catherine's description, accompanied by a young girl no one in town recognizes. The property remains unsold, held in trust for the next heir, a child who, according to legal documents filed by Catherine before her disappearance, will be named Eleanor. In the sealed records of the Historical Society, there is one final note of interest. Edmund Blackwater's sister wasn't the first Catherine in the family line. That name appears 7 times in the Blackwater genealogy. dating back to the original settlement in 1738. Each Catherine disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and each was replaced one generation later by another bearing the same name. The cycle continues. The door remains. What do you think happened to Catherine and her unborn child? Did she manage to reverse the ritual or become part of it? What is the entity beyond the door really seeking? Share your theories in the comments below. In the remote woods of Blackridge County stood an old house no one dared approach. It loomed like a dark secret, its windows like hollow eyes watching anyone who got too close. For decades, the locals spoke of strange whispers that carried through the wind, of shadows moving when no one was around. Some said the house itself was alive, feeding off fear and despair. The house had a history, but not one anyone fully understood. The Barker family knew none of this. When they first saw the house, Mark and Evelyn Barker were looking for a fresh start away from the bustle of city life. Their two children, Lily, 8, and Jacob, 12, were excited by the idea of a big house with a yard to play in. The house seemed perfect, spacious, isolated, and affordable. Too affordable, but they ignored their gut feelings. The house had been empty for years, and they assumed the rumors were just that, rumors. The first few days passed without incident. The family unpacked, explored the woods, and settled into their new life, but the house seemed off. It was the little things at first. The air always felt a little too cold, the silence a little too heavy. Then Lily's doll disappeared. It started small, objects disappearing and reappearing in strange places. Keys would vanish from the counter and turn up days later in the freezer. Lily's favorite doll would go missing, only to be found sitting upright at the dining room table. Then came the noises, a soft tapping on the walls, rhythmic and deliberate, the sound of footsteps pacing about when everyone was downstairs. The family brushed it off as the house settled in, but then Lily began waking up in the middle of the night, screaming. She claimed she saw a figure standing at the foot of her bed, a tall, thin figure with hollow eyes. But when Mark and Evelyn rushed in, there was no one there. Jacob became withdrawn, spending hours staring out his bedroom window at the woods. Evelyn's paintings took a darker turn. Strange, twisting shapes and shadowy figures began appearing on her canvases. Mark started hearing voices calling his name when he was home alone. The family began finding strange symbols carved into the wooden beams of the house, symbols no one could identify. Circles with jagged edges, spirals that seemed to twist endlessly. They painted over them, but the symbols always returned. One night, Mark woke to the sound of scratching. He found Jacob in the basement, carving one of the symbols into the wall with his bare hands. "It's coming," Jacob whispered. "It's underneath." Then came the voice, a calm, quiet voice, whispering their names. Sometimes it sounded like Mark's voice, calling Evelyn from the other room, only Mark wouldn't be home. Other times, it was Lily's voice giggling in the basement when Lily was upstairs asleep. The Barkers documented everything, the symbols, the whispers, the sightings, but their records ended abruptly in 1998. The entire family vanished without a trace. When investigators entered the house, they found the walls covered in those same symbols, symbols that weren't there just days before. In the basement, they found a single message scratched into the stone floor. "It knows you're here." But here's where the mystery takes an even darker turn. A week after the Barkers disappeared, their home videos were mailed to a local news station. The footage shows increasingly erratic behavior. Mark Barker talking to someone off camera who isn't there. Jacob sleepwalking and speaking in a language no one could identify. Lily drawing the strange symbols over and over. and Evelyn whispering the same phrase in her sleep. It's not the house, it's what's underneath. The final video cuts off suddenly, but not before capturing something truly chilling. The sound of heavy breathing and a single distorted whisper, "You're next." To this day, no one knows what happened to the Barkers. Some say the house is still waiting. Others claim they've seen figures in the windows, the outline of a tall, thin figure with hollow eyes. But there's one detail the police never made public, a hidden crawl space discovered beneath the basement. Inside were dozens of old rotting dolls, each one missing its eyes, and scratched into the walls were more messages, including one that said your name. How could that be possible? What do you think really happened to the Barkers? Was it the house, or something far worse? Leave your theories in the comments, and if you dare, visit Blackridge County. Just don't stay after dark. Months later, additional footage surfaced, tapes never released to the public. They revealed more chilling details. Evelyn speaking to unseen figures, Lily talking to someone she called the Whispering Man, and Jacob standing motionless in the woods for hours. The last tape ends with a blood-curdling scream and the sound of footsteps rushing toward the camera. Investigators found journals Evelyn kept, filled with half-written sentences and unfinished thoughts. Pages ended abruptly, often with the same words repeated. It's not done. Chores left half complete, dinner plates set for people who never arrived, and phone calls that ended without goodbyes. The sense of something unfinished, of a task never completed, hung over the house. Years later, a group of urban explorers entered the house. They live-streamed their adventure, and viewers saw more than they bargained for. Shadows moved independently, whispers filled the audio feed, and at one point, one explorer stared at the camera and said in a flat voice, "It's underneath." Moments later, the feed cut out, and they were never seen again. Theories range from a cursed object buried beneath the house to a gateway to another dimension. Some believe the house itself is sentient, others think it's the land, soaked in centuries of blood and despair. The house still stands, silent and waiting, and the question remains, what's underneath, and why does it know your name? Partial transcript from audio recording found at Cedar Ridge Research Station, dated September 4th, 2018. Dr. Elena Reyes. Testing. This is Dr. Elena Reyes, lead researcher at Cedar Ridge Atmospheric Research Station. Today is September 4th, 2018. Time is 23:47. I'm recording this as evidence of what we found, what we did, Dr. Reyes. The anomaly was first detected 3 months ago during routine atmospheric monitoring, a signal repeating at irregular intervals, frequency 87.7 MHz, initially dismissed as equipment malfunction or radio interference, but it persisted, grew stronger. Dr. Reyes, the sound signature matched nothing in our database, not terrestrial, not satellite, not anything we could identify. Dr. Kessler suggested it might be cosmic background radiation with unusual modulation. We started dedicated monitoring, round-the-clock observation. Dr. Reyes. That's when we noticed the pattern. It wasn't random. There was information encoded in the signal. After running it through spectral analysis, we isolated what appeared to be voices, human voices. Dr. Reyes. God, I can hear it even without equipment now. Inside my head, and the others say the same. It's changing us. Brodsky was the first to start translating it naturally. Then Williams, then Chen, now me. The voices are saying, Dr. Reyes told us exactly where to build it. The array, the amplifier. They said they needed a door, and we gave them one. I think they've been trying to reach us for a long time. I think something kept them away until now. Dr. Reyes. The containment field is failing. Chen said the calculations were perfect. But how could they be? We were just following instructions from the signal. From them. I'm sealing this recording in the secured vault. If anyone finds this, don't try to access frequency 87.7. They're waiting there, listening, speaking, and now, coming through. Dr. Reyes. They're here. I can see them. They look like Jessica Chen checked her seatbelt for the third time as the small propeller plane bounced through another patch of turbulence. Outside the window, dense fog obscured everything but the occasional glimpse of jagged mountain peaks. The pilot, a stoic man who had introduced himself only as Harlan, hadn't spoken a word since takeoff 90 minutes ago. How much longer? Jessica asked over the drone of the engines. Harlan adjusted his headset without looking at her. 20 minutes if the weather holds. Might be longer if this front moves in faster. Jessica nodded, clutching the manila folder on her lap. Inside was her assignment. Investigate and assess the status of Cedar Ridge Research Station, which had gone completely dark 3 weeks ago. As a senior investigator for the National Science Foundation's Oversight Division, Jessica had handled dozens of project reviews, facility inspections, and the occasional misconduct investigation. But this was different. The complete communication blackout from a high-priority government research facility had triggered security protocols far above her standard clearance level. Her phone chimed with a text. The signal was weak, but the message from her supervisor came through. Any comms from site yet? Pentagon requesting immediate update. Call when you land. She texted back a quick negative, then switched her phone to airplane mode to conserve the battery. Reception would probably be non-existent at the remote mountain facility anyway. We're starting our approach, Harlan announced, banking the plane slightly. You might want to look out your left window. You can see the station when we break through this cloud bank. Jessica pressed her face to the small window. The fog thinned momentarily, revealing a stark landscape of pine forests and rocky terrain. Perched near the edge of a cliff face stood Cedar Ridge Station, a cluster of modern buildings dominated by a massive satellite dish and several unusual antenna arrays. Even from a distance, something seemed wrong. The facility should have been brightly lit, bustling with activity. Instead, it looked dark, abandoned. No landing strip, Jessica asked, not seeing any cleared area nearby. Helipad only. We'll be using the emergency landing zone about 2 miles down the mountain. They'll have sent a vehicle to meet us. The plane descended through another layer of clouds, and the station disappeared from view. When they finally touched down on a crude runway carved into the mountainside, Jessica felt a wave of relief, quickly followed by apprehension as she realized no welcoming party awaited them. Seems your ride isn't here, Harlan observed, cutting the engines. Could try to radio the station again, but they haven't responded to any transmissions for weeks. I'll wait a bit, Jessica said. If no one shows, maybe you could give me a lift up to the facility. Harlan shook his head firmly. Contract says runway delivery only. Besides, storm's coming in. Need to get back before it hits or we'll both be stuck here. Jessica stepped out of the plane, shivering as the mountain air bit through her jacket. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sighing of wind through the pines. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and the air felt charged, heavy with the promise of a storm. I'll wait 30 minutes, Harlan said, checking his watch. After that, I have to take off. You can either be on the plane or stay here and figure something else out. Jessica nodded, pulling out her satellite phone, a special issue for this assignment. No signal. She tried her regular phone as well. Nothing. 25 minutes later, with no sign of anyone from the research station, Jessica made her decision. Whatever was happening at Cedar Ridge, she needed to see it firsthand. She retrieved her backpack from the plane and approached Harlan. I'm staying, she said firmly. Can you notify base that I've arrived safely but will need extraction in 3 days? I've got emergency supplies and the satellite phone if there's trouble. Harlan looked skeptical but nodded. Your call. Path up to the station is marked with blue blazes on the trees. About 2 hours hiking. Try to make it before dark. As the plane disappeared into the clouds, Jessica felt a profound sense of isolation settle over her. The forest surrounding the emergency landing zone seemed to watch her with ancient patient malice. She oriented herself using the GPS unit she'd brought, found the Blue Blaze Trail, and began the ascent toward Cedar Ridge. The path wound steeply upward through dense forest. An hour into the hike, Jessica noticed something odd. Complete silence. No birdsong, no insects buzzing, no small animals rustling in the underbrush. Just the sound of her own breathing and footsteps. Her satellite phone emitted a sharp burst of static, startling her. She pulled it out, but the screen showed no signal, no incoming call. Just as she was about to put it away, a voice, faint but distinct, seemed to emanate from the device. Jessica. She nearly dropped the phone. The voice had spoken her name, though the sound was buried under layers of static. She held the device closer to her ear. Hello, this is Jessica Chen. Who's speaking? More static then. Coming. You're coming to us finally. A chill ran through her that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Who is this? Identify yourself. The static grew louder, painful to hear, before cutting out completely. The phone's screen went black. Dead. Jessica stood frozen on the trail, her heart pounding. Equipment malfunction, some kind of interference from the research station's equipment, or was someone playing games with her? With no other choice, she continued upward, moving faster now. The forest grew sparser as she climbed, giving way to rocky terrain. As she rounded a bend in the trail, Cedar Ridge Station came into view, perhaps half a mile distant. The facility's main buildings hunched against the mountainside like a futuristic fortress, dominated by the massive radio telescope and a forest of smaller antennas. No lights, no movement, no sign of the 37 researchers and support staff who should have been there. Her attention was drawn to one structure in particular, a new addition that didn't appear in any of the facility schematics she'd studied. A circular array of what looked like transmitters or receivers, arranged around a central spire that reached at least 50 feet into the air. As she stared at it, a faint hum seemed to resonate through the ground beneath her feet. The first drops of rain began to fall as Jessica approached the perimeter fence. The main gate stood partially open, a serious security violation for a restricted government facility. A guard booth nearby was empty, a coffee mug still sitting on the desk inside. Jessica slipped through the gate, instinctively moving quietly despite the apparent desertion. The central courtyard between buildings was littered with abandoned equipment, tools, crates, a forklift with its key still in the ignition. Whatever had happened here, it had happened suddenly. The main entrance to the research complex bore signs of forced entry. The security door dented outward as if something had burst through from inside. Jessica hesitated at the threshold, the investigator in her noting details. No blood, no bullet holes, no obvious signs of violent struggle, just abandonment. She switched on her flashlight and stepped inside. The entrance hall was dark, emergency lighting providing only the dimmest illumination. Jessica consulted the facility map from her briefing materials, orienting herself. The main control room would be on the second floor central building. She needed to check the security logs, the research data, anything that might explain what happened here. As she moved deeper into the facility, the air grew noticeably colder. Her breath fogged in front of her face. The walls and floor seemed to vibrate subtly. That same hum she'd felt outside, now more pronounced. Static electricity made her hair stand on end. In the main corridor, she found the first sign of what might have happened. Words scrawled on the wall in black marker. Don't listen, don't listen, don't listen, don't listen. Jessica photographed the writing, a knot forming in her stomach. Further down the corridor, more messages appeared. 87.7 megahertz is their door race new. Too late to stop it, they look like us but they're not. The stairwell to the second floor was dark, emergency lights either broken or disabled. Jessica climbed carefully, her flashlight beam jumping with each step. The hum grew stronger as she ascended, vibrating through her teeth and bones now, almost painful. The control room door was sealed with a biometric lock, but someone had disabled it. Wires hung from an exposed panel, the mechanism clearly bypassed. Jessica pushed the door open slowly. The scene inside hit her with the force of a physical blow. The large circular room was filled with monitoring equipment, computer terminals, and large display screens, all normal for a research facility. What wasn't normal were the modifications. Every available surface had been covered with strange, intricate symbols drawn in marker paint, even what looked like blood in some places. The symbols formed patterns that seemed to flow across walls, floors, and equipment in concentric circles. At the center of the room stood a makeshift device, a tower of cannibalizing computer parts, radio equipment, and custom-built components Jessica didn't recognize. Cables ran from this cobbled-together machine to the various monitoring stations around the room, and on every computer screen, every monitor, every display, the same thing showed: visual static with a frequency readout at the bottom of each screen, 87.7 megahertz. The static wasn't random. As Jessica stared, patterns emerged, shapes moving within the visual noise, almost like faces, pressing against the screens from the inside. A sudden sound behind her made Jessica whirl around, heart pounding. A figure stood in the doorway, human shape, but something wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too thin, face obscured in shadow. "Hello," Jessica called, her voice tight with fear. "I'm Jessica Chin, National Science Foundation. I'm here to investigate the communications blackout." The figure remained motionless for a moment, then spoke, a voice like radio interference shaped into words. "We've been waiting for you, Jessica. We knew you'd come. Who are you? Where is everyone from the research team?" The figure took a step forward into the dim light cast by her flashlight. Jessica gasped. It looked like a man, but wrong. The skin too pale, too smooth, like plastic. The eyes reflected her flashlight beam like an animal's would. "The researchers heard us, built what we needed. They're part of us now, but incomplete. You're different, special. Your brother knew." "My brother?" Jessica's blood ran cold. "What do you know about my brother?" Michael Chen had disappeared 12 years ago while working on a classified government project. The official report said he died in an accident, but no body was ever recovered. The mention of him here, now, couldn't be coincidence. The figure smiled, its mouth stretching too wide. "Michael helped build the first receiver before Cedar Ridge. He heard us before anyone else. He's waiting for you." They all are. Through the door, the static on the screens intensified, the shapes within becoming more distinct. Dozens of faces pressed against invisible barriers, mouths moving soundlessly, or perhaps not so soundlessly. The hum in the room had become a cacophony of whispers, just below the threshold of comprehension. Jessica backed toward the other exit, keeping her eyes on the figure. "What door? What are you talking about?" "The frequency is the door, 87.7 megahertz. The barrier between has grown thin. They built the amplifier, the beacon. Listen and you'll hear them too." As if on cue, Jessica's dead satellite phone crackled to life in her pocket, emitting a burst of static followed by a chorus of voices, including one she recognized instantly. Jess, it's me. It's Michael. We need you. Please." The figure in the doorway glided forward, not walking but moving in a strange fluid motion unlike human locomotion. "The storm is perfect. Power for the final broadcast. All receivers tuned, 87.7 megahertz everywhere. You'll help us, Jessica. Family should be together." Lightning flashed outside, momentarily flooding the room with harsh light. In that instant, Jessica saw the figure clearly. Its face a grotesque approximation of human features, like something trying to remember what a person should look like, and she realized with horror that it resembled her missing brother. Jessica ran. The corridors of Cedar Ridge Station had transformed in Jessica's absence, or perhaps they had always been this way, and she simply hadn't noticed. Walls that should have been straight now curved subtly, creating disorienting perspectives. The emergency lights flickered in patterns that seemed almost deliberate, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. She ran blindly, no longer consulting her map, driven by pure instinct to put distance between herself and whatever had been waiting in the control room. The voice from her satellite phone continued, her brother's voice, pleading for help, interspersed with bursts of static and other voices whispering in languages she didn't recognize. Jessica ducked into what appeared to be a laboratory, slamming the door behind her and bracing it with a chair. Her breath came in ragged gasps as she fought to calm herself, to think rationally. She was an investigator. She needed evidence, facts, not panic. The laboratory looked like a storm had hit it, equipment scattered, papers strewn about, chemical spills dried on countertops. In the center of the room, a large whiteboard covered in equations and diagrams drew her attention. At the top, someone had written a frequency modulation theory, interdimensional resonance hypothesis. Below were complex mathematical formulas far beyond Jessica's understanding, interspersed with more comprehensible notes. Signals strongest during electromagnetic storms. Sentient communication confirmed. They exist in parallel space-time, separated by quantum barrier. 87.7 megahertz equals sign resonant frequency of barrier, not extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional. And at the bottom, in different handwriting, increasingly frantic, they're lying about what they need the amplifier for, not a door for them, a door for us. This was all a mistake. Destroy the array. Jessica took photos of everything, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. This wasn't mass hysteria or some kind of environmental contamination causing hallucinations. The researchers had been communicating with something that had instructed them to build technology it needed, something that had apparently broken through. A desk in the corner caught her attention, neater than the others, with a small nameplate, Dr. Elena Wynn, Research Director. Jessica rifled through the drawers, finding a leather-bound journal in the bottom one. She opened it to the most recent entry, dated September 4th, 28, the day before communication from the station had ceased. Final calibrations complete. The array works perfectly, exactly as they instructed. Atmospheric conditions tomorrow will be optimal for full activation. Chen believes it will create a stable passage between dimensions. I'm not so certain anymore. There's something they're not telling us. The way they speak about our world. Hungry, desperate. When we first detected the signal 3 months ago, I never imagined it would lead to this, but the potential for knowledge, for advancement, how could we not proceed? Williams is exhibiting concerning symptoms, prolonged fugue states, speaking in voices not his own, claims he can see them even without the equipment now. Chen says it's just excitement, but I've ordered a full psychological evaluation for all staff. Too late to stop the activation sequence now anyway. It's been programmed to sync with the storm front. Personal note, the dreams are getting worse. I see them coming through. Thousands of them, wearing our faces, using our voices, taking our places, and behind them, something else, something vast, patient, ancient. May God forgive what we've done here. A crash from somewhere in the corridor startled Jessica. The lights flickered, failed, then returned dimmer than before. She pocketed the journal and moved to the window, looking out at the facility grounds. The storm had intensified, lightning striking with unnatural frequency around the strange circular array she'd noticed earlier. With each strike, the central spire glowed with an eerie blue-green light. More disturbing were the figures she could now see moving across the compound, human-shaped but wrong somehow. Their movements too fluid, too synchronized, dozens of them, converging on the array. Her satellite phone crackled again. Jessica, please, it's not what you think. We need you to complete the sequence. You're the final component. She switched the device off and removed its battery for good measure. Whatever was speaking wasn't her brother. A sound at the door scratching, followed by a soft tapping. Then a voice, perfectly human, speaking normally. Hello, is someone in there? Thank God, I thought I was the only one left. Jessica froze, staring at the barricaded door. The voice sounded genuinely human, frightened, exhausted. Who are you? She called, not moving to unblock the door. Dr. Sarah Lindstrom, Meteorology Department. I've been hiding since everything went wrong. Are you from the rescue team? Jessica approached the door cautiously. I'm Jessica Chen, NSF investigator. I was sent to find out why communication communication stopped. What happened here, Dr. Lindstrom? A pause, then they came through. During the activation test, the signal entities, too many to contain, then they took people, replaced them. Please, let me in. They're coming back this way. Jessica hesitated, her instincts warring with compassion. If this was a legitimate survivor, she couldn't leave them outside. But after what she'd seen, step back from the door, Jessica instructed. I'm going to open it slightly. Stay where I can see you. She removed the chair and opened the door a few inches, keeping her foot braced against it. In the corridor stood a woman in a lab coat, petite, red-haired, with glasses and an exhausted expression. Normal looking, human. Thank you, the woman breathed. I've been hiding in the maintenance tunnels. They don't go down there much. I think the electromagnetic interference is stronger underground. Jessica studied her carefully. How do I know you're really Dr. Lindstrom? The woman's face registered surprise, then understanding. You've seen them. The replicas. She reached into her pocket slowly, producing an ID badge. This is me, but I understand your caution. They look just like us, but they're intense. Their movements are wrong. They don't blink enough, and they can't stand salt. Sodium disrupts their molecular cohesion. That's how I've stayed alive. Created a perimeter they can't cross. It sounded bizarre, but no more so than everything else Jessica had encountered. She opened the door wider, allowing the woman to slip inside, then quickly rebarricaded it. Dr. Lindstrom, if that's who she really was, collapsed into a chair, clearly exhausted. How many came with you? Is there an evacuation plan? I'm alone, Jessica admitted. Communications from Cedar Ridge went dark 3 weeks ago. I was sent to investigate. The color drained from Lindstrom's face. 3 weeks? That's not possible. The incident happened yesterday, September 5th. Jessica stared at her. Today is September 26th. No, Lindstrom whispered. No, that can't be right. Unless, she looked up sharply. Time dilation. We theorized it might be a factor in cross-dimensional contact, but to this extent, Jessica showed her the calendar on her phone as proof. Lindstrom studied it, her scientific mind visibly working through implications. If what you're saying is true, then the full invasion hasn't even started yet. Lindstrom said, what happened yesterday, what felt like yesterday to me, was just the initial breach. The entities that came through were scouts preparing for the main event, which is what exactly? The complete activation of the array during an electromagnetic storm of sufficient power, like the one happening right now. Lindstrom moved to the window, watching the lightning striking around the facility. They needed us to build technology our science barely understands. A dimensional amplifier tuned to frequency 87.7 MHz, the resonant frequency of the barrier between our world and theirs. What are they? Jessica asked, dreading the answer. Lindstrom's face grew dark. We don't know their true nature. They presented themselves as interdimensional researchers, like us, seeking contact, shared knowledge, cultural exchange. But it was a lie. She picked up a marker and drew a diagram on a clean section of whiteboard. 2 circles representing worlds with a barrier between them. Their dimension is dying, entropy reaching critical levels. They need somewhere else to go. They've been searching for a compatible reality, sending signals across the dimensional barrier. When we detected them and responded, they found what they were looking for. And the array is what? A portal, a door, but it needs a tremendous amount of power to fully activate, like the electromagnetic energy from this storm. And it needs, Lindstrom hesitated. What? A biological component. Human consciousness acts as a kind of quantum observer, stabilizing the dimensional gateway. That's why they needed us. That's why they copied us. Our consciousness, our memories, transferred into constructs that can exist in both dimensions simultaneously. Jessica thought of the thing in the control room, wearing something like her brother's face. You said they replaced people. What happened to the originals? Lindstrom looked away. They're still alive, in a sense, conscious, but trapped on the other side. I've heard them sometimes, through the equipment, calling for help. Lightning struck directly on the array's central spire, the building shaking with the thunderclap that followed. The lights went out completely,
plunging them into darkness, broken only by the eerie glow now emanating from the array outside. "It's starting," Lindstrom whispered. In the sudden darkness, Jessica couldn't see the other woman's face clearly. Something about her voice had changed, a subtle modulation that raised the hairs on Jessica's neck. "Dr. Lindstrom, do you have a flashlight?" No response. Then movement in the darkness, not toward Jessica, but toward the door. "They're calling everyone to the array," Lindstrom said, her voice now overlaid with a static-like quality. "The final activation requires all replicas present. You should come too, Jessica. Your brother is waiting. She's here, just like you calculated," she added, speaking to someone Jessica couldn't see. Jessica backed away, fumbling for her own flashlight. When she managed to switch it on, the beam revealed Lindstrom standing by the now unbarricaded door. Her movements were wrong, too fluid, head tilted at an impossible angle. "You're one of them," Jessica breathed. Not Lindstrom smiled, the expression stretching too wide on both Lindstrom and Not. Her memories, her knowledge, but improved, evolved. "You could be too special, like your brother. The Chen bloodline has unique properties. Quantum observer effect is exponentially stronger. Stay away from me," Jessica roared, backing toward the window. "Don't be afraid. Transition is painless. Your consciousness will transfer perfectly, and then you'll understand everything." The entity that had been masquerading as Lindstrom moved with sudden inhuman speed, crossing the room faster than Jessica could react. Cold hands clamped around her arms with impossibly strong grip. "Let me show you," it whispered, face inches from Jessica's. This close, she could see the wrongness more clearly. The too smooth skin, the eyes that didn't quite focus properly, pupils expanding and contracting independently of light levels. As it touched her, Jessica felt a strange sensation like static electricity, but flowing from the creature into her skin, spreading numbness wherever it made contact. Her thoughts became jumbled, distant, as if someone else was filtering through her memories. Jessica Chen, born March 12, 1985. Brother Michael Chen, disappeared 2006. Parents deceased. No children. Perfect candidate. Minimal attachment notes to sever. The clinical assessment of her life came not from the creature's mouth, but directly into Jessica's mind. With horror, she realized it was somehow accessing her memories, her identity. With desperate strength, Jessica twisted in its grip, bringing her knee up hard into where a human's solar plexus would be. The creature stumbled backward, more from surprise than pain. Jessica didn't waste the opportunity. She grabbed a heavy microscope from a nearby counter and swung it with all her strength at the thing's head. The impact made a sound unlike anything she'd ever heard. Not the crack of bone, but a wet, static-filled squelch. The creature's face rippled, features momentarily losing cohesion before reforming. It hissed, the sound like a radio being tuned between stations. Jessica ran for the door, yanking it open and plunging into the darkened corridor beyond. Behind her, she heard the creature recovering, calling her name in a voice that oscillated between Lindstrom's human tones and something altogether alien. The storm outside had reached frenzied intensity, lightning striking the array continuously. Now, through windows she passed, Jessica could see figures converging on the central courtyard, dozens of them moving with that same warm fluidity. The replicas gathering for whatever final activation they had planned. She needed to stop it, needed to destroy the array somehow, but first, she needed to understand exactly what she was dealing with.
Jessica ducked into a small security office, locking the door behind her. The room contained monitoring equipment for the facility's surveillance system. If any of it still worked on emergency power, she might be able to see what was happening outside, maybe even access records from when everything went wrong. To her relief, the security console had its own backup battery. The monitors flickered to life when she pressed the power button, showing camera feeds from around the facility. Most displayed only static, but 3 were still functional. One showed the entrance lobby, empty and dark. Another showed a laboratory where half a dozen replica people were gathering equipment. A third showed the courtyard in array. Jessica gasped at what she saw on the third monitor. The array was fully active now, the central spire pulsing with unnatural light. The circular pattern of smaller antennas was rotating, though there were no mechanical parts that should allow such movement. Around the array, at least 30 replicas stood in concentric circles, arms raised, swaying in perfect synchronization, and in the center beside the main spire, something was beginning to take form, a distortion in the air, like heat waves but more substantial. A door opening between worlds. She accessed the security system's archived footage, searching for September 5th, the day everything went wrong, according to the real Lindstrom. Most files were corrupted, but one remained intact. Exterior camera 4, time-stamped 1324 to 1336 on September 5th, 2018. The footage showed the array during what must have been its initial activation test. Scientists in lab coats monitored equipment while the central spire powered up, glowing with the same light it displayed now, though less intense. For the first minute, everything appeared normal, a controlled scientific experiment. Then at 1327, something changed. The spire's glow intensified suddenly, pulsing in a pattern not unlike a heartbeat. The scientists reacted with alarm, several running to equipment panels. In the center of the array, the same distortion she'd just seen on the live feed began to form, and something came through. The camera's resolution made details difficult to discern, but it looked like a tendril of darkness, reaching out from the distortion. It touched the nearest scientist, a balding man with glasses who immediately collapsed. Seconds later, he stood again, but his movements were wrong. He turned to the camera, revealing a face that was almost but not quite human. More tendrils emerged, touching more researchers. Some tried to run, but security personnel who should have protected them simply stood watching, already converted. Within 2 minutes, every human visible in the frame had been replaced by something wearing their appearance like an ill-fitting suit. The footage ended abruptly at 1336, cutting to static. Jessica sat back, her mind racing to process what she'd witnessed. This wasn't an invasion in the traditional sense, it was infiltration, replacement, and if the replicas succeeded in fully activating the array during this storm, how many more would come through? Hundreds? Thousands? An entire world's population? A banging on the security office door jolted her back to her immediate danger. The knot Lindstrom had found her. Jessica, this is pointless. The activation is nearly complete. The frequency is broadcasting globally now. Every radio, every television, every cellular device will transmit 87.7 megahertz. Doors everywhere. You can't stop what's already begun. Jessica looked desperately around the small office for anything she could use as a weapon or escape route. Her eyes fell on the security console again, specifically on an emergency button labeled Facility-Wide Shutdown NIC Electromagnetic Pulse. An EMP would fry all electronic equipment in the facility, including potentially the array. Your brother helped build the prototype, Jessica. Did you know that? Project Resonance, 2006. He was brilliant, understood the frequency better than anyone. That's why he was the first to be improved, the first to transition successfully. Jessica's finger hovered over the EMP button. If she pressed it, she'd also lose all power, all electronic defenses, and she'd be trapped in a mountain facility with dozens of hostile entities. But if she didn't, whatever was happening at the array would be completed, and that seemed far worse. We can feel you thinking, Jessica, your mind broadcasts so clearly. The Chen family trait. We've been hearing you since you arrived. The banging on the door grew more insistent, the metal beginning to dent inward. Jessica made her decision. She pressed the EMP button. An automated voice announced, warning, facility-wide electromagnetic pulse will initiate in 60 seconds. All personnel evacuate sensitive areas. Backup systems will remain offline. This action cannot be undone. The banging on the door stopped. Then strangely, laughter seeped through, a sound like broken radio signals approximating amusement. Oh, Jessica, that won't work. The array isn't powered by this facility anymore. It generates its own energy now from the frequency itself, a perfect loop. but thank you for disabling the human defenses. It will make the transition smoother." Despair threatened to overwhelm her, but Jessica fought it back. There had to be something else she could do. She turned back to the security monitors, watching the courtyard feed. The distortion at the array's center had grown larger, more defined, almost like a doorway now through which something massive was gradually emerging. The EMP countdown continued. 30 seconds to electromagnetic pulse. Jessica's eyes caught on something in the camera feed, a fuel tank near the array, likely for the facility's emergency generators. If the array couldn't be disabled electronically, perhaps it could be destroyed physically, but she'd need to get to the courtyard, past dozens of hostile entities. 20 seconds to electromagnetic pulse. A thought struck her. The Knot Lindstrom had said the replicas couldn't stand salt. It disrupted their molecular cohesion. It seemed absurd, but no more so than anything else she'd encountered. The security office had a small break area with a kitchenette. Jessica ransacked the cabinets, finding a large container of salt beside the microwave. She didn't have time to question the science. She simply pocketed it. 10 seconds to electromagnetic pulse. Jessica braced herself, picking up a fire extinguisher as a weapon. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Every light, every electronic device in the room died simultaneously. The town of Ashbourne had always been quiet, but it was a stillness that felt peaceful until the day Mr. Hale vanished. His empty house was found locked from the inside, but his car remained in the driveway, his breakfast half eaten on the table, and in his living room stood a mannequin, lifelike, identical to Mr. Hale, frozen in an expression of wide-eyed terror. The air around it was thick and cold, as if the room itself was holding its breath. At first, the townsfolk tried to rationalize it, a prank, an elaborate trick, but when Mrs. Winslow went missing a week later and her perfect replica appeared on her porch, Ashbourne's quiet turned to fear. Rumors spread of the mannequins moving when no one was looking, of whispers heard late at night. The police were baffled, and no one knew where to turn. Mia and Ethan hadn't known fear like this before. Their parents tried to shield them from the panic gripping the town, but the strange occurrences grew harder to ignore. The mannequins never moved when watched, but sometimes they were closer than before. Mia swore she heard one whisper her name when she passed too close, a faint, rasping sound that seemed to come from nowhere. Ethan began having nightmares. In them, the mannequins watched him, their mouths slowly stretching into smiles. He woke up one night screaming, convinced he'd seen one standing at the foot of his bed, but when their parents rushed in, there was nothing there. Desperate for answers, Mia and Ethan explored Ashbourne's history and found mention of ancient spirits, the silent ones said to replace the living with perfect, empty copies, but the records were incomplete. The last pages of the journal torn out. The silent ones were described as watchers, waiting for moments of vulnerability to strike. Then the mannequins began appearing inside homes. Mia's friend Clara vanished next, and her replica was found sitting at the family dinner table, her glassy eyes reflecting candlelight. The road twisted through dense woods, the trees pressing close, as if trying to swallow the car whole. The town of Briar's Hollow was little more than a whisper on old maps, a forgotten place tucked far from the rest of the world. When Lauren and David Cooper first saw it, they almost didn't believe it was real. The town looked frozen in time. Old Victorian houses with sagging porches, a single general store with sun-faded signs, and a church bell that never seemed to ring. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth, and something metallic. They had come for a fresh start, escaping a life that had grown too complicated in the city, but Briar's Hollow was waiting. As they drove down the main street, Lauren noticed the lack of activity. No children played in yards, no dogs barked, and no one tended to the worn-down homes. An old woman peeked from behind a curtain and quickly pulled it shut. When their eyes met, David squeezed Lauren's hand. "It's just a quiet town," he said, but the words felt hollow. The house they rented sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by thick woods. It was larger than they expected, but its isolation felt suffocating. The porch sagged, and the windows stared out like hollow eyes. As they unpacked, the wind carried a strange sound, almost like whispering. The house they'd rented was ancient and silent. It creaked in the wind, and the windows rattled even when there was no breeze. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old wood and something faintly metallic. On their first night, Lauren woke to the sound of soft scratching from inside the walls. David dismissed it as mice, but Lauren wasn't so sure. As they settled in, the strange occurrences began. The lights flickered, the air grew colder without reason, and sometimes Lauren swore she heard faint footsteps upstairs when no one else was home. The next morning, they found their neighbor standing in their yard, staring at their house. He was an older man, his face lined with fear. When David approached him, the man only whispered one thing before walking away: "Don't let them see you at night." The townspeople were strange. They spoke in hushed tones and avoided eye contact. At the diner, conversations would stop when Lauren and David entered. There were no children, and no one spoke of why. Then people started disappearing. First, the owner of the general store, then the mailman. Their houses would stand empty, but lights flickered inside at night. Lauren tried to ask questions, but the answers never made sense. "People leave," the waitress at the diner said with a tight smile. "That's just how it is here." But Lauren noticed the fear in her eyes. Lauren found them first: strange symbols carved into trees, etched into the glass of old windows, spirals and jagged shapes that seemed to hum when you looked at them too long. One night, David woke up to find their front door wide open. Outside, the symbols were drawn in the dirt, circling their house. The next day, Lauren discovered more symbols in their basement, this time drawn in what looked like dried blood. The voices began soon after, soft, insistent whispers coming from the vents, the walls, the woods. They spoke in a language neither of them recognized, but sometimes they heard their own names. David started sleepwalking, his eyes wide and blank. Lauren found him one night at the edge of the woods, staring into the darkness, whispering along with the voices. The whispers grew louder each night until they felt like they were coming from inside their heads. One by one, the remaining townsfolk disappeared. The town grew quieter, emptier. The air grew colder. One night, Lauren saw them, figures standing in the mist beyond their house. Tall, thin figures with hollow eyes and twisted mouths. They didn't move, but she felt them watching. David began speaking in his sleep, repeating one phrase over and over: "It's waking up." In the library, they found the town's old records, mentions of an ancient cult, of sacrifices made to keep something beneath the town asleep. The symbols were wards, but they were failing. Lauren realized the disappearances weren't random. The town was feeding whatever slept below. One journal described a ritual, one that required blood. In the basement of the church, they found the tunnel, a narrow, spiraling path leading deep into the earth. The air grew thick and hot, the whispers turning to screams. At the end of the tunnel stood a door covered in symbols. It was cracked open. The ground trembled as something massive shifted behind the door. The thing inside was waking up. David was pulled through the door. Before Lauren could stop him, she ran, the screams following her all the way back to their house. The symbols outside had changed. They were no longer wards. They were invitations. Lauren armed herself with knowledge, the symbols, the wards, the history of the town's ancient deal. She carved the protective marks into the walls and floor, knowing the town wouldn't let her leave. But the figures came anyway, and this time they moved. They circled the house, whispering her name. The walls shook as something massive approached. When the rescue team arrived weeks later, Briar's Hollow was gone. The entire town had vanished, leaving only a wide blackened crater in the earth. But at the edge of the woods, someone had carved a message into a tree. It's still hungry. I never wanted to leave the city, but something pulled me here. Maybe it was the solitude. Maybe it was the desire to find peace. I didn't know what I was walking into, and I don't know how to leave. Sarah, the protagonist, is introduced in a voiceover. She's a woman in her early 30s, recently divorced, who has retreated to this quiet town to work on her first book. The house she's renting was once owned by an eccentric old man who disappeared years ago. From the first night, things are off. The quietness of the house is too oppressive, the shadows too long. Sarah begins to hear whispers through the walls. At first, they seem like figments of her imagination, perhaps just the wind or the house settling. But over time, they become more insistent, clearer, and more personal. Seeing Sarah is lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. The whispers grow louder, seeming to circle around her. Sarah, they hiss. She sits up, the bed creaking under her weight, but the room is empty. I've been hearing it for days, every night. It's never the same. Sometimes it's just a name, sometimes it's just static, but it feels like it's right next to me. She brushes it off, as stress and lack of sleep, but then it starts to get worse. Items in her home begin to move on their own. A chair is pulled out when she isn't looking. The TV flickers on in the middle of the night, showing only static, until her own face appears in the screen for a split second, frozen in a distorted expression of terror. One afternoon, Sarah explores the attic. Among boxes of old books and forgotten furniture, she finds a weathered journal. Its pages are brittle, ink smeared with age. The journal belonged to the previous tenant, a man named Thomas, who lived in the house a decade ago. The journal contains strange entries, filled with cryptic references to a shadow. The shadow was always watching me. I felt its presence even when I couldn't see it. I can't trust anyone anymore. It will take me next. The final entry cuts off abruptly, and the last page has one incomplete line. It wants to destroy. Sarah attempts to investigate the journal's contents, reaching out to people who knew Thomas. However, every lead she follows is a dead end. She learns that the town was never the same after Thomas's disappearance. People started leaving, businesses shut down, and strange occurrences began cropping up. A local librarian tells her there's a curse on the town, but refuses to say more, warning her to stay away from the old house. The more Sarah digs, the more she realizes that the whispers are not just in her head, they are real. She begins seeing shadowy figures out of the corner of her eye, but they vanish before she can focus on them. Her nightmares become more vivid and disturbing. One night, she dreams of a dark figure reaching out for her in a pitch-black room, only for the figure to whisper her name. Sarah, it doesn't stop. I can't breathe. I can't think. It's always here. The deeper Sarah goes into the history of the house, the more disturbing details she uncovers. She finds a map hidden beneath a floorboard, showing a series of abandoned buildings throughout the town. One of the buildings is marked with the same symbol she saw earlier, etched into the basement floor. As Sarah follows the map, her connection to reality begins to weaken. The buildings are deserted, empty shells of their former selves, but Sarah feels an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, as if she's been here before. Every turn she takes feels preordained, like the town is trying to lead her somewhere. Scene: one night, she stands at the edge of a dark alleyway near the town's cemetery. She feels something pulling her toward the old chapel at the end. As she steps forward, the camera zooms in on her face, her eyes wide with both terror and fascination. The tension builds as the house's supernatural activity escalates. One night, Sarah finds the old journal's final page, but it's partially burnt, charred in a way that only adds to the mystery. She reads it aloud. It has been waiting all this time. I can feel it. It will. As she reads the last few words, the lights in the room flicker violently, and the house begins to shake. The whispering reaches a deafening crescendo. Sarah drops the journal, but it doesn't stop. It wants to. The sentence dies on her lips, never to be completed. The screen goes black, but the whisper lingers in the background. The viewers are left wondering, what exactly does it want? What is the nature of this presence? Why did the previous tenant leave such cryptic warnings? Throughout her investigation, Sarah is haunted not only by the growing terror in the house, but also by her strained relationships with her family. Her estranged mother calls her, pleading for her to come back home. The phone calls become more frequent as Sarah's grip on reality weakens. Scene: Sarah breaks down during a call with her mother. Mom, you don't understand. I can hear it. It's here. I feel like it's inside me, taking over. I don't know how much longer I can do this. Her mother tries to comfort her, but Sarah is beyond consolation. Her emotions a tangled mess of fear, confusion, and sorrow. Sarah's investigation reaches its peak. She finally discovers the hidden chamber beneath the chapel, a room where the shadows seem to swirl around her, closing in. She records a final video message for her mother, warning her not to come. She says she's learned the truth, but it's too late. As she whispers the final words, "It's inside me now," the door behind her creaks open. Her face twists in terror as something moves in the shadows. The camera cuts to black, just as a figure steps forward, reaching out towards Sarah. The last sound we hear is the whisper, "It's waiting." Call to action. Did Sarah survive? Is she the next victim of whatever haunts this town? Or did she become part of it? What do you think is behind the whispers? Was it all in her mind? Or is something darker at work? Comment your theories below. We'll leave the story unfinished, but you can be the one to unravel it.